Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for joining us tonight. We're sorry to get started a little bit late, but this is our first virtual event at McLean and Aiken, and we're having some growing pains. So we're here and we're excited. We're very honored this evening to be speaking with Dr. Abdul El-Sayed, who, among many things, is the author of the new book "Healing Politics: A Doctor's Journey into the Heart of Our Political Epidemic." Dr. El-Sayed's parents immigrated from Egypt, and he was born in Detroit. Went to high school at Bloomfield Hills and college at University of Michigan. He is a Rhodes Scholar and received his PhD in public health in 2011 from Cambridge University. 2015, Dr. El-Sayed was appointed the health officer and executive director of Detroit's health department. In late February of 2017, he announced his candidacy for governor and, although unsuccessful, certainly defied the odds and garnered broad support for his campaign. His dedication to the public welfare continues, and his new book clearly defines his concerns for our state and our nation, as well as detailing a path to resolving them. There is so much for us to delve into here, so without further ado, welcome Dr. El-Sayed. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Matt, thank you so much for having me. It is a privilege to be with you all. And Petoskey, we were really looking forward to coming in person. COVID-19 has changed that plan, but grateful that we have modern telecommunications that allows us to do this virtually. Petoskey is one of my favorite places in Michigan, and I have a lot of great memories, both from the campaign and both before and after. So really wish that I could have been there in person, but hopefully next time.
There's a paperback, I'm sure.
Yep, there you go. I'm really grateful for the space that you've given to have a discussion. I have the brutal irony of being an epidemiologist who published a book about an epidemic in the middle of the worst pandemic in a century. So, I want to give readers a flavor for why I wrote this book, what I want to communicate, and why I think it matters right now. Probably even more now than it did when I wrote it. As folks will know, I ran for governor, and I ran because I got frustrated with a political system that seemed to get in the way at every turn when we wanted to do work that benefited the people that we were serving in the city of Detroit when I was health director there. And I realized that was part of a broader politics that had put corporations ahead of the well-being of people, and that politics was the same politics that had poisoned 9,000 kids, 100,000 people in Flint, and the same politics that ultimately elected Donald Trump president of the United States. Now, when I decided to run, my training as an epidemiologist is something that I thought I was going to pack into the recesses of my mind, that instead of being an epidemiologist every day, as I did at the health department or even before that, I was trading the epidemiologist in me for a candidate. And I set about campaigning crisscrossing the state, made my way up to Petoskey and down to Adrian and across to Benton Harbor. And I had thought that the conventional wisdom was true. And that wisdom is that our state is extremely diverse, and there is no way that if you were talking to poor and working white people in places like Kalkaska or up in the UP, that they were going to have the same perspectives on issues and the challenges that they faced every day as poor and working or retired Black folks in places like Detroit or Flint. And then I started to campaign, and I got to meet folks in their living rooms and their VFW halls and in the places that they call home. And what I found was that, in fact, the conventional wisdom was completely off. And as I would make my way back home in those dark nights on I-75 or I-94 or I-96, the epidemiologist in my mind would come back out and try and make sense of what I learned that day. And it turns out that people were asking the same basic questions and challenged with the same basic anxieties. Why, in a state with more fresh water than any other place on earth, do we still struggle to get basic clean water to people in their homes? Why does our kids' school look the same way it looked like when we went there, despite the fact that we are the richest, most powerful country in the world? Why do I have to worry about going bankrupt if me or a loved one gets cancer? These are the questions that people are asking no matter where we went. And my goal in this book was to both tell my story, but then also to tell the story of us, to talk about what I diagnose as an epidemic of insecurity, and both why we're suffering it, and probably more importantly, particularly as we catapult into an election season, what it means for our politics. And what I mean by an epidemic of insecurity is a baseline level of anxiety about ourselves, our loved ones, and our futures that emanates from a substructure of failing interlocking systems that we have come to rely on to provide us the basic means of a dignified life. And that includes the healthcare system that is more interested in allowing corporations, be they on the insurance side or the hospital side, make a killing while unfortunately allowing patients to suffer if they don't have the means of being able to pay sums that are accelerating in cost. A housing system that tends to subsidize people who earn more than $100,000 while evicting people who earn less. A system of failing infrastructure across our state and our country. And it's not just our roads, it's our airports, and it is our public transit systems that have been deconstructed to make way for cars. It is our system of energy production that is having us burn stuff that comes out of the ground into the lungs of our children. It is a failing economic system that is trading away high quality jobs that used to come with a living wage and allow us to know that we'd have a little bit left over and benefits when we retire for gigs that pay less and don't come with those same kinds of benefits, nor the kinds of security that old school jobs used to come with, or a political system that tends to be dominated by corporations who can buy and sell politicians at whim. And so all of these things together, and the fact that we've sold all of them off for profit to a few rather than for service to the many, leave us recognizing that the losses of the basic things we come to rely on, they leave us insecure. And I want to tell that story in painstaking detail. But I also want to talk about what it takes for us to heal that insecurity. And that, I believe, is a profound commitment to an investment in empathy, the ability to put ourselves in other people's shoes, to recognize why they are suffering and how that suffering may shape their political perspectives, and to ask, how do we come together to rebuild this broken infrastructure of our lives, rather than to focus on how we allow these moments to continue to divide us. And so, that is the gist of the book. And I do want to read just a couple of representative pieces here. This is from the introduction that sort of lays the groundwork for the book. On the campaign trail one day, a woman who looked like a 72-year-old Shirley Temple grabbed my face, squeezing my cheeks. Her light brown eyes radiated a warmth and honesty. "Son," she asked, "are you listening to me?" She had waited in a reception line after a town hall at a church in suburban Detroit. Her blue "Hello, my name is" sticker gave her name Sally in big, bold, curling cursive. "Ma'am, with all due respect, you've got your hands on my face." "Yes, I'm listening to you," I said through my smushed lips. I'm already feeling kind of young, I thought to myself, and this lady's making me feel like I'm 12. To be sure, Campaign Stop 8 that day had just become the most notable. "Son, you've got a great smile," Sally said, "and I hope you keep smiling. A lot of people are going to say terrible things about you. I've already heard it. But you got to keep smiling, because it's really hard to hate someone who's smiling at you." On the one hand, it would have been easy to react to this Pollyanna-ish advice with sarcasm. You think a smile is going to solve racist death threats? But on the other, I had been coming to the same conclusion. Sally was reminding me that people are good, even if sometimes the things they say and do are not. Everything that Trump has unleashed in our politics is motivated by fear. And there's something about the empathy in an honest smile that uniquely melts through fear and cuts through hate. And in a small way, this is what I was trying to do. Even though I was a 32-year-old Muslim American named Abdul and a doctor who had never been elected to office, I declared my candidacy for governor of Michigan in February of 2017. I had served the city of Detroit as health director, my only government experience, having rebuilt the health department after it was privatized in 2012 when Detroit was facing municipal bankruptcy. Prior to that, I'd been an epidemiology professor. But in the aftermath of the Flint water crisis and Donald Trump's election, I felt that perhaps my skills as a physician and epidemiologist could help heal my state. And my campaign as the son of an Egyptian immigrant and the stepson of a daughter of the American Revolution could remind us who we are as a country. Over 18 months, I visited more than 150 cities in nearly all of the 83 counties in the state of Michigan. I had thought that I was leaving the epidemiologist in me behind when I chose to become a candidate for office. Rather, I found myself subconsciously applying my scientific training across the thousands of people I met. As an epidemiologist, I was trained to coax stories from inanimate lines of data to find the elemental truths buried within them. As a candidate, I was hearing those stories in living color. I would listen to a single mother or a retired Iraq War veteran or a little 8-year-old girl sharing story after story of pain or hardship, of pride and triumph. I could watch their eyes, appreciate the emotional weight that hunched the back, and feel the emphasis in the extra squeeze of my hand. I found myself during those long car rides back from distant parts of the state trying to identify the patterns in what I'd learned, to test my hypotheses. In Marquette, an older gentleman, Jake, told me how he deeply believed in gun rights, having gone hunting every year since he was a child. But his little girl had been murdered by her ex-husband, using a gun that a man with a history of domestic violence should never have had. Rebecca from Grand Rapids told me her son Jason had already beaten cancer twice. He was 8. She fears it'll come back when he's older and worries that even if he beats cancer a third time, he could be bankrupted by the cost of medical care. Sean came out as transgender in high school and began his transition in the face of hatred and bullying. And yet he graduated at the top of his high school class. His mom worries about how they'll afford his college tuition. Keisha was one of the top graduates from her high school in Flint, but she had to drop out because the job at McDonald's that pays her bills won't give her regular hours. Unable to afford auto insurance, she has to take the bus, tacking an extra hour to and from work into her already precarious work schedule. She's taking online classes, but doesn't know if she'll get her degree. My heart ached for these folks, for the struggle that they endured, for their futures hanging precariously in the balance. My mind raced to make sense of them. On those long car rides home, those endless days of campaigning, I came to appreciate that the justice each of us wants is simple. We want to know that we can work an honest job, make a fair wage, afford the roof over our head, and put meals on our tables, and have a little something left over to enjoy. But more than that, we want the peace of mind to look at our children and believe that their lives will be just a little bit better than ours. And we want to know that we can enjoy these things together as communities. This is the American dream as I understand it. And then I want to read another piece from the experience on the campaign trail. And this involves somebody a lot of folks will have heard of. On June 6th of 2018, I was scrolling through Twitter on a long car ride home in Michigan. Then I happened upon a retweet from a progressive group that had just endorsed me for governor. It was yet another viral video of a young woman from the Bronx named Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Before she became universally known as AOC, her very own 3-letter moniker marking her ascent to the pinnacle of political stardom. She was fierce, honest, and bold. And whatever the it is, that rare amalgam of fearlessness, authenticity, and raw charisma that people look for in leaders, she had it. I clicked the blue follow button on her profile, and it turned out that she had been following me too. I sent her a direct message to let her know how much I appreciated her and her campaign. The next morning, she messaged back, "Thank you, and likewise," followed by a brown fist emoji. "So proud of what you're doing in MI. We're doing the dang thing," purple heart emoji. "Wishing you all the strength and grace in the world." 2 weeks later, my grandpa Jan, who lives in Hamburg, Michigan, texted me, "Just watched an interview of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez running in NY 14th District primary. She's amazing. Have you met her?" "Yeah, she's great. Not formally, but a big fan of hers," I responded. "She sounds a lot like you. Very similar positions." It's good to see young capable people getting into politics. That was the first inkling I had that this out-of-nowhere young Latino woman from the Bronx who'd been bartending just a year earlier was going to upset the political establishment and realign the stars of the political universe. As her race heated up in the last few weeks leading up to the primary, I messaged her in support. "You are blowing up. My grandpa, Jan Johnson from Hamburg, Michigan, just texted me about you. Keep going." On June 28th, I was on my way out of the office after a day spent fundraising on the phone when I ran into a few campaign staffers. After we caught up on some of the day's happenings, the conversation turned to the Ocasio-Cortez primary. One of my staffers was a grizzled veteran of tough congressional primaries. Having upset the political establishment before, this one was too much. "Crowley's got that district on lock," he said knowingly. "He's the king of Queens." "No way she can win," another staffer agreed, shaking his head. "I don't know, guys. She's got that spark," I said. Had I been a betting man, I would have made some sweet cash that night. We just finished dinner, and I was holding Emily in my lap as Sarah's family and I sat around the family room watching CNN. The coverage was focused on the Supreme Court's disastrous decision to uphold Muslim Ban 3.0, the Trump administration's third effort to make good on a campaign promise for a total and complete shutdown of all Muslims entering the United States. The monotone blare of the talking head explaining the court's rationale dimmed as my thoughts wandered to what this country might look like when the little girl in my arms, brown and Muslim, grew up to be my age. How much time and effort will her generation have to spend cleaning up after our failures? Or will they be so overwhelmed by them as to stop trying? I wondered. The host wrapping up his interview with the monotonous legal expert brought my focus back onto the television screen. After all, I hadn't been watching for the legal analysis tonight, but for the election ticker underneath. And just then, I saw it flash to New York's 14th district. With 60-something% of all precincts reporting, they had called it for Alexandria. I erupted, waking up my half-sleeping daughter and startling everyone else in the room. She won. I can't believe it. She won. The ticker had changed again, so it took a few moments for me to show the family what I was celebrating, that I hadn't just gone mad. Meanwhile, I rocked my baby girl back to sleep as I paced nervously, giddily, back and forth. Maybe it won't be so bad, I thought. Exactly a month later, I'd get to tell AOC in person what it meant to watch her shock the world with my little girl on my lap, something I will never forget. She had graciously flown in for a rollicking day of rallies across Michigan in the lead up to my primary, just a few short days away. So that's a taste of some of the book, and would love to take questions from you, Matt, or from other folks who have them.
Well, I know we'll have lots of folks wanting to talk about the book and have questions for you. I have a few things that I thought I might ask about as we get started and wait for other folks to join in. I think the book's amazing. I love the way you set up the book, really kind of talking about your motivations and what brought you into the world of medicine and then politics, and then kind of talking about where you see things in the country. It's really well laid out. But I was hoping you might take a little time talking about some of the things that led you to epidemiology, and really I thought it was fascinating when you discovered social epidemiology. It almost seemed like a light appeared above your head as if this was your calling. And I would really love it if you could share a little bit about some of those first studies, in particular the post 9/11 study that you worked on. I thought that was terrifying and fascinating.
Yeah. So I didn't know public health was a thing when I was in college. And it's funny because I had tried my best to approximate it, not knowing that. I studied biology and political science. And I, always used to get made fun of by my lacrosse teammates and my friends. They'd always say, well, how are you going to combine those things? So I don't know, but I know that's what I'm interested in. And I actually quit playing lacrosse my senior year. I had a lot of time on my hands. And a mentor of mine said, you should check out public health. So I emailed a bunch of professors. Literally only one of them got back to me. And I ended up working with him for the next 10 years. And while I was there was a postdoc in the group who pulled me aside and said, you should really read this paper. The paper by a researcher named Diane Lauderdale at the University of Chicago that looked at the probability of both preterm birth and low birth weight among babies born to women with Arab names, both after 9/11 immediately, and then in the same 6-month period in the year prior. And what it showed is that after 9/11, the risk for prematurity and low birth weight increased substantially. And it increased even by more if the infant's name was ethnically distinctive. And this was a moment where I saw, politics and the social world collide into health and the scientific world. And that was the moment I became a social epidemiologist. And at that point I said, I've got to replicate this study here in Michigan to see if there was the same effect, because I remember 9/11 very clearly. I remember the sweater I was wearing when I watched the second plane hit the towers from my chemistry class my junior year in high school. And the impact it had on my family and our community was, it's life altering. My little brother's name is Osama. And I remember the fear that my family had for him and his safety. He's 8 years younger than I am. So you can imagine I was 16 and my brother was 8. And so, to see that experience actually tangibly impacted the health of people who had nothing to do with it, babies. because of the marginalization and the discrimination that the community experienced after 9/11 was pretty profound. And that's what got me into epidemiology and sort of led me into public health.
We do have some questions popping up. I have many more of my own, but I think I'll let our viewers ask some questions. I don't know, are you able to see those, or would you like me to read them to you?
I've got a question from Alexia.
Okay.
Will you run for governor or another office again? I don't know. I think I probably will, but I don't know if that's going to be anytime soon. And I'll just explain why. When I've ran for office, I ran for office because I believed in the responsibility of politicians to drive meaningful policy. I still do. But I thought that policy was what drove politics. And I've come to appreciate that it is profoundly not true. What drives politics is culture. When we as a society decide that we want to change what we believe about right and wrong, that's when things change. And I think politicians are there to translate culture into policy. I mean, the perfect example of that is Black Lives Matter. 5 years ago, it was considered a fringe movement. Now, 10% of Americans, 1 in 10 Americans, participated in a Black Lives protest in the middle of a pandemic. And we've got broad societal consensus that things need to change. Now it's on politicians to turn it into policy. But I think that there's a lot to be done in terms of shaping and explaining policy into culture. And I feel like that's what I've spent a lot of my time doing, both through this book and through the podcast and through my work at CNN. And I think that's really important. I also have a 2-year-old, and there's a silver lining in every cloud. Between January 1st and March 11th, I took 35 flights. And since March 11th, I have taken 0 flights, which means that every day I wake up and the first two people I see are my partner, wife, and best friend, Sarah, and my daughter, Emily. And that's kind of amazing. So I think that the responsibility to be a good dad is really critical. And as a friend told me, there can be a lot of, there's always going to be a governor. There's always going to be a congressperson. There's always going to be a senator. The only person who can be your daughter's dad is you. And I take that really seriously. So I'm just thinking a lot about when I might, when I might jump back in, perhaps someday soon, perhaps otherwise. But I'm not in any rush. I will continue to do the work that I'm passionate about, whether that's at the cultural level or the policy level or the political level. But I other things to make sure I'm paying attention to. How has having a child affected your political aspirations? From Jesse Lynn. What an amazing feed into that question. I mean, in 2 ways. I sort of already explained why it sort of put the brakes on, the immediate sense of jumping right back in. But also, it has very much put an exclamation point on the need for change and the need for representation. There are not many Muslim Americans in American politics. And there are, few progressives who broken through and been able to drive the conversation about what we can do to take on a lot of these challenges. And as I think about, the fact that, I'm 35, if I'm lucky, I get to double that number. And, if I'm lucky after that, I get another, 15 years, really lucky. That's not a long time. And I think about the world that we're going to leave for them and their kids. And there is a lot of change that needs to be made. And I think that there's a real responsibility to make that change. And, seeing her every day and thinking about, just the raw honesty and emotional awareness of a child and the goodness of children, we owe them so much better than what we have right now. And that, I think, requires all of our work. So it has put an exclamation point on the importance of the work, even if I also really want to just be a good dad, and I don't ever want to say, I banged my head against all these problems, but I was not there for my own kid, which is something I think a lot about.
Yeah.
I
think that's a good balance to have.
I appreciate that, Matt. Thank you. So Lynn, I feel like I got to your question. Thank you for asking it. And then I've got a question from Andy. Can you speak about the future of rural healthcare, specifically the geographic challenges of access points, the closure of community hospitals? Sure. Look, when we talk about disparities in this country, it is critical that we talk about racial and ethnic disparities and socioeconomic disparities, but also geographic disparities are real. And part of the reason that they are so real is to the question that's being asked is we're watching rural communities get hollowed out by just demographic change. We are failing to provide very basic public services. When I ran for that reason on a MiFi plan, and one of the goals with MiFi was just to subsidize rural Wi-Fi, which is the information superhighway. It'd be like saying we don't have roads in your community because you're too rural. And that used to be the case back in the day. And I just think that in 2020, it is absurd to ask young folks and people of all stripes and businesses to keep up in rural communities without adequate access to Wi-Fi. And healthcare, of course, is part and parcel of that. What we have right now is an accelerating consolidation in our healthcare system. And what I mean by that is you're watching large hospital systems buy up rural healthcare clinics and hospitals. And if they can't run them for profit because of the lack of density and the general poverty, a lot of folks on Medicaid doesn't reimburse as well, then they shut them down. And they shut them down without thinking about what that means then for getting adequate healthcare to folks who live in those communities. Folks are left having to drive an hour, 2 hours to get basic healthcare, and catastrophically in the setting where somebody might have a heart attack. And part of the reason why we have that consolidation is because we have a profit motive on both sides of the healthcare calculus. On the providing calculus, whether that's hospitals and clinics, you're incentivized to make money, or on the insurance side of the equation, you're trying to make money. And so what that leads to is collusion between the insurance industry and the hospital industry to negotiate reimbursements that tend to hurt smaller hospitals that tend to be rural regional hospitals. So they get shut down first. That's part of the reason I believe so deeply in Medicare for All. I end this book with 13 ideas to heal our future. Not surprisingly, if you followed my work, one of them is Medicare for All. In fact, I've got another book about Medicare for All. It's called Medicare for All, A Citizen's Guide. It's coming out in February because I just think it's so important that we understand how this policy works. And what Medicare for All does is it just eliminates the profit motive on the insurance side. It basically says, I don't care if you're a hospital that's big or a hospital that's small. I don't care if you're a hospital that's urban, suburban, or rural. You will get the same reimbursement for the same service. After all, an MRI doesn't cost, it's not a different service if it's done in a rural community or it's done in urban Detroit. And so it's a lot fairer. And what it allows us to do is help to prop up rural hospitals to keep them going by actually reimbursing at a higher clip in those communities so that we incentivize healthcare providers to come out. And so, that is my assessment of why we have such a hard challenge providing rural healthcare, what we need to do about it, and why Medicare for All maps to a better solution here.
I actually wanted to ask something about the book. At one point, you talk about the lifespan disparity between somebody in Detroit and someone in Leland, which is a community we know up here, and I think similar comparisons could be made to our county, Emmett. However, from my time up here and working in school systems, I know the farther we get from the coastline, the more those lifespans really may change. And I've often wondered if the low population rates skew those numbers because we have a small group of people who are rather affluent with longer lifespans. We have a lot of people up here that are not experiencing that. So I often wonder if the northern experience is somewhat skewed by that affluent population.
There's no doubt. I mean, you think about Leelanau, you think about Petoskey. Or just one example is it takes about 20 minutes to get from Traverse City proper to Kalkaska, and the experiences there couldn't be more different. And that has everything to do with, you know, the folks who will move up to the coast and, you know, can drive the property values and, you know, then, you know, retire up to Traverse City, which is lovely. But, you know, you're talking about a very different socioeconomic experience. And, you know, one thing that we have to understand and we have to keep our eyes on is that we have an accelerating level of inequality in our society and in our country, in our state. And, you know, the fact that you can drive 15 minutes and that 15-minute drive can be between Traverse City and Kalkaska, or it can be between Birmingham and Detroit. And either way, you're talking about a 10, 15-year life expectancy gap with fundamentally different life experiences. And so we've got to keep our eyes on that. And it has to frame how we engage solutions.
You know, a lot of your book talks about empathy and maintaining that empathy. And I wanted to ask you, in this time when we're fighting so many fronts, and it seems like new fronts are coming up every day, whether it's a mask or, you know, something to do with the epidemic, what do you do to maintain that level of empathy for folks and in each conversation you engage in?
I have to tell you, it is hard. You know, the nature of our conversations now do not prioritize empathy. And just put an example, Twitter does not, you know, it does not prioritize our best response. It prioritizes our fastest response. And most of us, our first response, our first, you know, the first thing that comes to our mind isn't usually our best response, right? That's just not how our psychology works. And so, you know, that's that experience of like, why I oughta, right? And then you step back for a second and you're like, you know, maybe I ought not to. You know, the nature of so much of our interactions happen through these platforms that depersonalize us and prioritize speed over thought. And I think we have to step back and we have to try and have as many of our interactions as de-technologized as possible, right? So, you know, if you were going to shoot off a text, call somebody. If you're going to call them, right? FaceTime them. If you're going to FaceTime them, right, then just go visit them, right? These are all better, obviously not in a pandemic, but those are better ways of communicating. And I just think that, you know, we are hardwired to look people in the eyes. And you know, one of the things that's an interesting human response to feeling uncomfortable is like the smile, because it forces you to stand down, right? You know, and I just think that, you know, we can't let technology get in the way. The other part is this. So many of us focus on the argument when the argument comes at the cost of the future. And if you have to win one, the argument or the future, choose to win the future. And what I mean by that is try and keep the relationship so you can continue to have that bridge with someone else, rather than working so hard to win the argument that you've then pissed someone off and can no longer win the future. And I just think that if more of us were thinking about winning the future rather than winning the argument, we would do so much better. And then the last point is this. Sometimes we focus on what someone says rather than why someone said what they said. And, you know, there's a very simple, I think, quote that can summarize so much of human interaction, is that hurt people hurt people. And if you ask why someone is hurt and what that pain is maybe pulling out of them, I think it can help us to step back and call to the better angels of our nature. And then the last point I'll say is that, you know, especially in more rural communities, if you want to win, right, and if you want to win the future, it's going to be because someone saw something in the character that created the perspective that you have, rather than just the answer, right? And I think sometimes we forget that we are our message, right? The way that somebody interacts with you and the thing that they see in you and the way that you smile and the way that you treat them is part and parcel of a message. So, you know, oftentimes I see a lot of folks who are like, I believe in inclusion, and they're yelling it at people. It's like, no, inclusiveness is just doesn't yell usually. Like that's not how it works. And so I just think that we need to pull ourselves back from the way that technology has incentivized us to communicate, and rather focus on empowering one another, asking why one another are hurting, and focusing on winning the future rather than the argument.
No, it's a tall order, but I think you're right. That's where we need to be headed. So, I didn't know, the last chapter of the book with your 13 points is a lot to digest. I think it's a phenomenal list. I mean, when I was first looking through the book, I ended up there, and that's when I knew this is just an incredible book. And were there any parts of those points that you'd like to call out? I particularly, there are several points I found fascinating. The banking issue is one that I think is a really an exciting concept. But is there anything that you'd like to call attention to in that, or?
So I'll talk to a couple of them. Banking. So the financial industry has decoupled itself from the labor market. And if you want an example of that, just look at stock prices and unemployment numbers. In the past, every time unemployment numbers were high, stock prices would plummet. Now, every time unemployment numbers are high, stock prices seem to go up. And all that says is that corporate well-being has been completely divorced from human well-being. And that's a real problem. And it's because of this system of financialization that I talk about in the book. No longer are companies rewarded for being profitable. They're rewarded for appearing like they're going to be profitable in the future, because of course that's what their stock prices respond to, right? It's the potential of their future earnings as told by some analysts on Wall Street. And we've got to rein that in. And that is part of a broader set of policies that are really focused on curbing corporate power. Banking is part of that, right? Like one of the things that we don't have, and part of the reason our infrastructure is so broken, is that government has a hard time financing large projects in the future. And at the same time, a lot of people don't have banks. And so like, imagine having a public bank that could both finance these large government projects at the local and state level, and also could support folks who may not have the same kind of liquidity to be able to access the private banking infrastructure. That's one idea. I talk about the Green New Deal, but I also talk about an idea of a Blue New Deal, right? Which, if you're from Michigan, you can appreciate that water infrastructure is critical. Protecting and safeguarding our fresh water and creating jobs in the process is a real important thing to do, and we ought to be doing it. One last one that I want us to sort of really focus on, that I think underlies a lot of our challenges with COVID-19, is that our education system has not kept up. We don't educate people on basic mathematics and science, let alone social science and history, like we should. And part of that is because we've just disinvested in public education. And meanwhile, we're investing hugely in the military. And I think we should be pegging military spending to public education spending. And rather than funding at the state and local level, we should be funding nationally. Every kid should have a certain dollar amount that follows them no matter where they go. If they live in Detroit, or if they live in Kalkaska, or they live in Bloomfield Hills, they all should have the same dollar amount that gets invested as a birthright of being born in America. And the reason that I said that this connects to COVID-19 now is because, what's become painfully obvious about this response is that people just don't understand the scientific process. Science is not a body of knowledge. It doesn't tell us what to do. Science is a process for understanding how the world works, and it evolves because we have hypotheses and then we test them. So you look at the controversy around masks, for example, and early on in the pandemic, we didn't know that COVID-19 could be spread asymptomatically. And for that reason, we said, well, look, if people who have symptoms should be away from everyone else, and masks should go to people who are forced to be among people with symptoms, i.e. people on the front lines. So no, you shouldn't wear a mask. And then we realized that, well, COVID actually can be spread asymptomatically, in which case everybody should be wearing a mask, because we don't know who has COVID and who doesn't, and who could be spreading it, who doesn't, because they don't have symptoms. And that was part of the scientific process that helped us to understand that and change our recommendations. But now a lot of folks are like, well, science said X, and now it's saying Y, So clearly science doesn't know what it's talking about. You're like, no, actually science knows exactly what it's talking about, because now we've gone through the process to understand what is actually evidence-based intervention. And if we had a better baseline understanding of science as a society, perhaps we'd have an easier time messaging this, but we don't.
Having leaders that support science is also helpful.
That is also helpful, no doubt. Yeah, that is, I mean, and that's the other thing, right? It's like, it takes leaders have to be on the front lines of messaging this. You've got folks like Anthony Fauci, who's, trying to push into the headwind of Donald Trump, who, questions basic science and tries to relegate it all the time. So you're absolutely right.
I would love to keep talking about this all night, but you've got a little one to read a story to, I'm sure. And I do love asking visiting authors when they're here, or I guess virtually. Anybody you're reading right now? Anybody you'd like to call out a book, author? Anybody?
So I'm gonna pull up.
Get you on the spot.
No, I'm gonna pull up my Audible.
Okay.
There are a couple
or
of
even Libro.
Libro.
There's Libro.
Right? Libro.
We've got your book on Libro.
So Libro. You know what? I've got to make the switch. I've got to make the switch. You are right. So
it's a great audiobook, though.
Well, I appreciate that.
The reader's okay, but
the reader's okay. So I'm reading John Dickerson's "The Hardest Job in the World" about the American presidency.
Okay.
I just finished Mary Trump's book. I'm reading a book by a gentleman named Daniel Siegel about the whole brain child, about parenting. I just finished James Clear's Atomic Habits, which I really liked. And then Vivek Murthy's book Together, I think, is a really profound read. If you're interested in loneliness, he writes a really, really great book. He's the former Surgeon General. I just finished Bakari Sellers' My Vanishing Country, which I enjoyed. Separated by William Lopez, talks about, it's sort of an ethnography of a family that gets separated by ICE. And I've just downloaded The Sword and the Shield, which is Peniel Joseph's book about the civil rights era and Malcolm and Martin. And so those are a couple that I've liked. And then lastly, Augustine Sedgwick's book, Coffeeland. I'm a big coffee drinker. I'm probably the only person who's drinking a cup of coffee at 6:52. Amazing. So we'll clink our glasses.
Cheers.
It's about the early coffee trade in El Salvador. It's a really amazing ethnography of coffee. And then the next book I want to read when I'm done, there are two that I'm excited for. One is called The Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton. It's about modern monetary theory. And then the other one is called Pharma by Gerald Posner, and it's about pharma.
PH.
And then PH Pharma. How to Be an Anti-Racist. I finished like last month. Is now a sort of a new modern classic. And then lastly, Linda Sarsour, her book We're Not Here to Be Bystanders, I think is just fantastic too. So
I'm sorry you couldn't come up with anything.
Well, the nice thing is that they're all like here. So
we will do our best to get that list transcribed and posted at some point. So
awesome. Well, I appreciate you and thank you. And I'm gonna have to download Libro and read there. So
we'll work on getting you switched. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for tuning in. I hope we do more of these and more of these discussions. I'd love to have you back again for the book on the healthcare for all. I did see that drop. It's going to be in February. That's right. We'll get that out there and posted too. We saw that it's coming. So
it would be my privilege. And thank you so much for having me, Matt. I hope that next time we get to do it in person.
I would love to. And maybe our daughters can play sometime.
Oh, that'd be fun.
That would be huge. Take care and please keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Have a great night.
You too.